The Atlantic pressed against my mask with the weight of 300 feet of black water. My lights carved two pale tunnels through the murk ahead, catching particles of sediment that drifted past in lazy spirals. The descent line disappeared into darkness above and below me, a thin thread connecting surface to something that shouldn't exist. My depth gauge read 320, still going down. The cold had worked through my dry suit around 200 feet, settling into my joints the way it always did on deep dives. I ignored it, focused on my breathing instead, slow and controlled, conserving gas. The regulators hissed with each inhalation, mechanical rhythm marking time in the void. I'd been diving for 16 years, worked oil rigs in the Gulf, salvage operations off the Carolina coast, a few jobs I didn't list on any resume, built a reputation taking contracts other divers walked away from, the kind where the money compensated for the odds of coming back up. Never turned down work because it scared me. This one should have been different. 350 on the gauge now. The pressure squeezed tighter, a constant reminder of how much ocean sat between me and air. I adjusted my buoyancy, added a short burst to the wing to slow my descent. Didn't want to overshoot the target. Cole McCormick had called me 6 days ago. Didn't waste time on pleasantries, just laid out the job in that clipped British accent of his. Some kind of artifact recovery, premium rates, immediate departure required. I'd worked for collectors before. They paid well and asked fewer questions than insurance companies. The SS Meridian, he'd said. Are you familiar with it? I wasn't. Told him so. Disappeared in 1952. Routine cargo vessel Charleston to Nassau. Vanished without distress signal in what sensationalists call the Bermuda Triangle. His voice carried the dismissive tone of someone discussing superstition. Deep Sea Survey located the wreck 3 weeks ago. I require specific items recovered. The depth gauge clicked past 400 feet. My lights still showed nothing but empty water and drifting sediment. How deep had McCormick said? 470? 480? Too deep. That was the first thought I'd had when he gave me the coordinates. A cargo vessel going down in open ocean shouldn't settle at that depth, not in this region. The continental shelf dropped off fast east of Bermuda, sure, but the charts didn't show any trenches or canyons at the position he'd provided. 3 times your standard rate, McCormick had continued before I could voice concerns. Plus expenses and equipment bonuses. $50,000 for the job, Mr. Andrews, regardless of what you recover. $50,000. I'd made good money over the years, enough to keep my gear maintained and my bills paid, but that kind of sum bought a lot of future jobs I could afford to be selective about. Maybe even bought some time off. Not that I'd know what to do with it. Greed overriding judgment. Story of my life. 430 feet. The water had gone from dark to absolute, a blackness my lights couldn't penetrate more than 20 feet ahead. I checked my gas. Still plenty in the main tanks, both stage bottles clipped to my harness full and ready. I'd brought enough tri-mix to handle an hour at depth with decompression reserves. McCormick had offered to supply whatever I needed. Money wasn't a concern for him, apparently. Old money, the kind that came with estates and family names, and the assumption the world existed to serve their interests. I'd met his type before. They collected things. Art, cars, artifacts pulled from wrecks. Not because they needed them, but because possessing rare objects proved something to themselves and their circles. What he wanted from the Meridian, he hadn't specified. Told me I'd know it when I saw it, that he'd provided photographs to Angela for reference. Angela Gross ran surface support, operating the vessel and managing my tether and communications. We'd worked together for 5 years, long enough that I trusted her to keep me alive when things went wrong. She'd been skeptical about this job from the start. Survey data looks wrong, she'd said while reviewing McCormick's briefing materials. Sonar profile doesn't match a cargo vessel that size, and the depth. She'd shaken her head. Seth, nothing puts a ship at 480 in open water. Not a storm, not structural failure. She'd have to be scuttled deliberately, and who scuttles a cargo ship in the middle of the Atlantic in '52? Valid questions. I hadn't had good answers. 460 feet. My lights caught something below. A change in the water, darker shapes emerging from the black. The wreck. My heart rate kicked up despite years of training. Adrenaline was useful in measured doses, kept you sharp when things got complicated. Too much, and it burned through your gas supply and clouded judgment. I focused on breathing again, slowing the rhythm. The shapes resolved as I descended. Metal hull plating, encrusted with 70 years of marine growth. The wreck sat upright on the bottom, intact from what I could see in the limited cone of my lights. That was unusual. Ships that went down fast usually broke apart on impact, scattered debris across the seafloor. This one looked like it had settled gently, deliberately. Like Angela said, scuttled. 470 feet. I reached the descent line's terminus, the weighted end resting on silt-covered deck plating. I clipped off to the line and hung there, taking stock. The meridian stretched away into darkness on both sides, a ghost ship sitting where no vessel had any business being. My lights played across portholes dark as eye sockets, across railings bent and twisted by time and pressure. Sediment covered everything in a gray-brown blanket, undisturbed except where my bubbles rose and scattered it. Silent. That's what hit me first. Wrecks always felt silent, but this had a quality beyond the usual stillness, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears, that made you aware of every mechanical sound your equipment produced. I checked my gas again. Procedure, making sure I hadn't burned through more than expected during the descent. Numbers looked good. I had time. McCormick wanted artifacts, specific items, though his photographs had been grainy and unclear. Something from the cargo hold, maybe the captain's quarters. He'd been vague about details, which should have bothered me more than it did. 50,000 had a way of quieting concerns. I unclipped from the descent line and activated my camera, the housing's lights adding 2 more beams to my primary illumination. Documentation, standard practice for salvage work. The lens captured the hull stretching away, the undisturbed silt, the impossible stillness of a ship that had vanished 70 years ago. The SS Meridian. Maritime mystery. Now just another wreck waiting to give up its secrets to someone willing to descend far enough into the black Atlantic water. I kicked forward, fins driving me toward the superstructure. Time to earn that money. Time to find what Cole McCormick wanted badly enough to pay 3 times standard rates for a dive that made experienced salvage operators shake their heads. The wreck waited, patient and silent in the crushing darkness. The first thing that hit me wrong was how intact she looked. I'd been descending through the black for what felt like forever, my lights pushing against water so thick with sediment it barely let the beams through. The descent line disappeared somewhere above me, into nothing. Below, just more darkness waiting. Then the meridian appeared at the edge of my light range, and my brain stuttered trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She sat upright on the ocean floor, not tilted, not broken, not collapsed into the kind of twisted wreckage you'd expect from a ship that went down in a storm. The hull rose clean and straight from the sand. Dark timber still fitted tight, no gaping holes where the sea had torn her apart. Both masts stood vertical, rigging still attached in places, swaying gentle in the current. The whole thing looked staged, a museum piece. Someone had taken a perfectly good sailing ship and placed it down here with the kind of care you'd use setting a model on a shelf. I circled wide, keeping my distance while my lights played across her length. 70 feet bow to stern, maybe 80. Merchant vessel from the lines of her, built for cargo, not speed. The wood was dark with age and pressure, and God knows how many years down here, but the structure held. No listing to port or starboard, no bow down angle. Just sitting there level and calm like she was tied up at a dock instead of resting under 300 feet of Atlantic. My breathing echoed loud in my helmet. In. Out. The regulators hissing their rhythm while I tried to process what my eyes were telling me. There should have been damage. Ships don't sink gentle. They go down fighting, tearing themselves apart on the way. Storm waves snap masts. Hull planks split when the pressure shifts wrong. The impact with the seabed breaks things, scatters debris across the sand in a field of wreckage that tells the story of the violence. I'd worked dozens of wrecks over the years. Every single one had that debris field. Cargo spilled across the bottom. Broken timbers, shattered equipment, the evidence of catastrophe. The Meridian had none of it. I dropped lower, angling my lights to scan the sand around her hull. Clean. Just the ship sitting there, and maybe 10 feet out in every direction the sand lay smooth and undisturbed. No scattered cargo, no broken planking, no trail of destruction leading back to where she'd hit. The ocean floor around her looked untouched, except for the presence of the vessel itself. Wrong. All of it wrong. I'd read the historical reports Cole McCormick had provided. The Meridian went down in a winter storm in 1853. 40-knot winds, 20-foot seas, the whole Atlantic trying to kill everything on the surface. Ships that sink in those conditions don't arrive at the bottom intact. They get ripped apart before they even finish sinking. But here she was. Perfect. Waiting. I pushed forward, closing the distance. 50 meters out now. 45. My lights caught more detail on her hull, the fitted planks still tight in their seams, the curve of her bow cutting through the current that moved past. My compass started spinning. The movement caught my eye, peripheral vision picking up the motion where the instrument sat mounted on my wrist. I glanced down. The needle was whirling, making full rotations clockwise, then switching back counterclockwise, moving so fast it blurred into a silver disk that meant nothing and pointed nowhere. I stopped swimming, hung there in the water column, 40 meters from the wreck, watching the compass spin itself stupid. The needle had been steady all the way down. North had been north, solid and reliable through 300 feet of descent. Now it was garbage, just a spinning piece of metal having some kind of mechanical seizure inside its housing. I tapped the face with one gloved finger. Hard. The kind of tap that usually unsticks a stuck mechanism or shakes loose whatever's jamming things up. The needle kept spinning. Didn't even hesitate. My backup compass sat mounted on the other wrist. Different manufacturer, different design. Both installed because redundancy keeps you alive when you're working this deep. I raised my left arm, angling it so my lights caught the instrument face. Same thing. The needle whirled in frantic circles, chasing itself around the dial without finding any purchase on magnetic north. Both compasses, both gone useless at the same time. A cold feeling settled into my chest that had nothing to do with the water temperature. I checked my depth gauge next. The digital readout flickered, numbers jumping and scrambling across the display. 200 feet, 400 feet, 120, 55. The readings cycled through impossible variations before finally settling back on 308 feet, which was approximately correct based on my descent time and rate. 3 instruments malfunctioning, all at once, all within range of the wreck. My hand moved to the communication switch on my chest mount before I'd consciously decided to call it in. Training. Instinct. When your equipment starts lying to you at depth, you tell the surface. Surface, this is diver. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, flat and mechanical through the helmet comm system. Experiencing instrument anomalies. Static crackled. Then Angela's voice came through clear and professional. Copy, diver. Describe the anomalies. Both compasses non-functional. Needle spinning. Depth gauge showing erratic readings before stabilizing. Malfunction began when I reached 50 meters from the wreck. A pause. I could picture Angela up there in the support vessel, noting everything down in the dive log with that careful precision she brought to every operation. She'd been running surface coordination for 12 years. She'd heard plenty of strange reports from depth. This one would rank pretty high on the list. Copy, all anomalies logged. What's your current depth reading? 308 feet. Appears accurate based on descent time. Your surface monitors show 305. Close enough for instrument variance. Are you experiencing any physical symptoms? Confusion, vision changes, motor control issues? She was checking for nitrogen narcosis. Standard protocol. Sometimes divers at depth start imagining equipment problems when the real problem is in their heads. The nitrogen loading into their blood and brain, making them drunk and stupid and convinced their gear is failing. But I felt clear. Sharp. My thinking ran clean and my hands moved steady when I raised them in front of my mask to check. Negative. No symptoms. Thinking clear. Copy. Can you proceed with the survey? Could I? I looked at the meridian, sitting there perfect and impossible in the cone of my lights. My compasses were trash. My depth gauge was questionable. I was 300 feet down in water cold enough to kill me in minutes if my suit failed, looking at a wreck that had no business being as intact as it was, with my instruments going haywire for no reason I could determine. Every instinct I'd developed over 15 years of diving work said, turn around. Get back on the line. Ascend. Figure out what was wrong with the equipment before going any closer. But Cole McCormick was paying me 3 times the standard rate, and I'd told him I'd do the job. Proceeding with caution, I said. Copy. Maintain regular check-ins. Any changes in instrument behavior or physical status, you abort immediately and return to the line. Understood. I switched off the comm and hung there in the water, staring at the wreck. Something was deeply wrong with this whole thing. The perfect condition of the ship. The complete absence of debris. The way my instruments had all failed at once when I got close. None of it fit the pattern of normal salvage work. None of it made sense. But the job was the job. And whatever waited inside that hull, Cole McCormick wanted it badly enough to pay premium rates for a diver willing to find it. I kicked forward, moving toward the meridian through water that suddenly felt heavier than it should, watching my useless compasses spin and spin and spin. The cargo hatch hung open about 15 feet up the hull, its heavy steel door suspended at an angle that didn't make sense for a ship that had gone down in distress. I hung there in the black water, my lights illuminating the rectangular opening, and felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. Ships don't sink with their cargo hatches standing open and waiting. I checked my depth gauge. 312 feet. My bottom time was already eating into the safety margins I'd calculated topside, and I hadn't even entered the wreck yet. The smart move would have been to abort, surface, recalculate, come back with better intel and a clearer plan. But Cole McCormick's money was already in my account, and I'd never been particularly good at smart moves when cash was involved. I kicked forward, angling my body through the opening with the kind of care you learn after your first time catching a tank valve on a jagged edge. The hatch frame passed inches from my shoulder. My lights swept the interior as I cleared the threshold, and what they showed me made me stop moving entirely. Hanging suspended in the water just inside the hull. Everything was there. I mean everything. Cargo containers still strapped to their securing points. their surfaces covered in a fine layer of sediment, but otherwise intact. Tie-down chains hanging in perfect vertical lines, swaying slightly in the current I'd brought in with me. A hard hat sitting on top of a tool chest, positioned like someone had just set it down before heading off for a coffee break. Ships that sink don't look this way. Water tears through them during the descent, ripping loose anything that isn't welded down. Currents redistribute debris. Cargo shifts and scatters. I'd done enough wreck work to know what violence looks like underwater, and this wasn't it. This looked like the Meridian had simply been lifted up and placed here, gentle as setting down a toy boat in a bathtub. My breathing echoed loud in my ears, the regulators hissing with each inhale and exhale. I forced the rhythm to stay steady. Panic breathing at 300 feet would burn through my gas supply faster than I could compensate, and I had a long way to go before I could surface. I moved deeper into the hold, my fins stirring up small clouds of sediment that drifted in the wash from my lights. The beam caught stenciled numbers on the cargo containers, shipping codes and weight ratings, all perfectly legible through their coating of fine silt. I reached out and brushed my gloved hand across one surface, watching the particles swirl away in the water. The metal underneath was clean. No corrosion. No rust bloom spreading across the steel. The Meridian had been down here for 3 years. I'd seen week-old wrecks with more deterioration than this. My light found a doorway at the far end of the hold, and I pushed toward it, moving through the water with the efficiency that came from 20 years of diving work. The door stood open, revealing a passageway that led deeper into the ship. Emergency lighting strips ran along the floor, their glow long dead, but the fixtures themselves still firmly attached to the deck. The passage was narrow enough that I had to be mindful of my tank, keeping my body aligned with the corridor's centerline. My lights showed walls painted in that industrial gray-green color every working ship I'd ever seen used below decks. Pipes ran overhead, their joints and flanges clear of themarine growth that should have colonized them years ago. I'd pulled artifacts from wrecks half this old that looked like they'd been dipped in concrete, the way barnacles and mussels built up on every surface. But here, nothing. Just clean metal and that fine layer of sediment that seemed to coat everything uniformly, gentle as dust settling in an abandoned house. The corridor branched. Left led toward what looked like crew quarters, doors standing open on small cabins. Right angled downward, following the deck toward the stern. Engine room would be aft and below. I took the right passage, descending along the sloped floor with my buoyancy compensator, venting small bursts of air to control the descent. The pressure increased incrementally with each foot deeper into the ship. 328 feet now. I was past the depth where nitrogen narcosis started whispering sweet, stupid ideas into divers' heads, but I'd been deep enough times that I knew how to recognize the feeling and push through it. Still, everything about this felt wrong in ways that had nothing to do with gas narcosis. The passage opened into a wider space, and my lights found metal stairs leading down into darkness. I followed them, gripping the railing more out of habit than necessity. Buoyancy made the descent effortless, my body sinking through the water column with barely a kick needed. The engine room spread out below me. It was massive. Twin diesel engines dominated the space, their bulk rising from the deck like sleeping giants. Control panels lined the walls, their gauges and readouts dark behind glass faces. Catwalks ran between the machinery, and pipes threaded through every available space overhead, a circulatory system frozen mid-pulse. My light swept across the room, cataloging details. Tool cart positioned near the starboard engine. Grease gun hanging from a hook. Coffee mug sitting on a shelf, its handle pointing left. And a man sitting at the main control station. I stopped moving, just hung there in the water, my lights fixed on the figure seated in front of the engine controls, and felt my breathing go shallow despite every bit of training screaming at me to keep it steady. He looked asleep. That was the first thought that went through my head, stupid as it was. Chief Engineer Tanner Howard, had to be him, based on the coveralls and the position, sat in his chair with his hands resting on the control panel, his head tilted slightly to one side. His eyes were closed. His expression was peaceful. That was the word. Peaceful. Not contorted in panic or frozen in a scream. Not showing any sign of the terror that should have gripped a man as his ship went down into the crushing depths of the Atlantic. Just calm. Quiet. Gone. I forced myself to move closer, my fins carrying me forward through the water with small, precise movements. The cold had preserved him in ways that made my skin crawl under the wetsuit. 3 years down here, and he looked like he might open his eyes and ask what I was doing in his engine room. His hands rested on the controls, not gripping them, not clawing at them. Just resting. Fingers curved slightly, positioned exactly where they'd need to be to make adjustments to the fuel mixture or throttle settings. His left hand was near the gauge cluster. His right hand sat on what looked like a master power switch, like he'd been running through a standard procedure and simply stopped halfway through. I'd seen bodies underwater before, drowning victims, divers who'd run out of air or made mistakes with their decompression, sailors who'd gone down with their ships. They all had something in common: violence. The body fights death, especially death by drowning. There's panic written in every frozen muscle, every contorted limb. This wasn't that. This was a man who died the way you fall asleep in front of the television. One moment present, the next just gone. I circled around the control station, my lights playing across Tanner Howard's face. No injuries I could see. No trauma. His coveralls were intact, oil-stained and worn but not torn. His boots were still laced. A wrench protruded from his front pocket, positioned exactly where a working engineer would keep a tool he used constantly. My breathing echoed louder in my ears. In, out. The regulators hissing their mechanical rhythm. How does a man die this way while his ship sinks? The question wouldn't leave my head. Ships don't go down peacefully. There's noise, alarms blaring, metal groaning, water hammering through ruptured bulkheads. There's chaos, men running, shouting, fighting to save the vessel or save themselves. Even if the engine room had flooded catastrophically, even if water had poured in faster than Howard could escape, he should have moved, should have tried to stand, to reach the stairs, to do something. But he'd just sat there and died with his hands on the controls and his expression calm as Sunday morning. I reached out, then stopped myself before my gloved hand touched his shoulder. Disturbing the dead wasn't something I made a habit of, and besides, what would it prove? He was gone, had been gone for 3 years. Whatever had happened to him, to this ship, it was long finished. But it wasn't natural. That certainty settled into my bones with the weight of all the water pressing down above me. I'd spent 2 decades working underwater, salvaging wrecks, recovering bodies, exploring places where disaster had struck. I knew what natural looked like, knew what accidents and equipment failures and human error produced. This wasn't any of those things. Something had happened aboard the Meridian. Something that had killed Chief Engineer Tanner Howard, where he sat without giving him time to react or fight, or even register fear. Something that had taken a working ship and put it on the ocean floor with all its cargo intact and its hatches standing open. Something wrong. I hung there in the black water of the engine room, my lights illuminating the peaceful corpse of a man who should have died screaming, and tried to imagine what force could do this. Tried to find an explanation that fit the evidence. Nothing came. Just the hiss of my regulators and the hammering of my pulse and the absolute certainty that Cole McCormick had sent me down here to find something that no amount of money could justify touching. The corridor leading toward the bridge stretched ahead of me, narrow and dark, the ceiling pressing low enough that I had to angle my tanks to avoid scraping against the metal overhead. My lights caught the walls in harsh relief, revealing patches of rust and streamers of algae that waved gently in the current I created moving through the flooded passage. More bodies waited. The first one I came across was wedged in a doorway about 20 feet down the corridor. A crewman, judging by the plain work clothes and the tools still clipped to his belt. He'd been trying to go somewhere when whatever happened to him took hold. His hands rested against the door frame, fingers slightly curled but not clenched, not grabbing, just touching, casual almost, the way you'd steady yourself walking through a ship in rough seas. His face looked peaceful behind the cloud of decay. I moved past him, my fins stirring sediment that settled on his shoulders in a fresh layer. The water here tasted different through my regulator. Stale somehow, though that didn't make sense through compressed air. Something my brain invented. Probably. The wreck getting to me the way wrecks always did when they still had their dead aboard. The bridge door stood open. I paused at the threshold, my lights sweeping across the space beyond. Navigation equipment lined the walls, brass fixtures gone green with corrosion. Charts hung suspended in the water, their edges curling, ink faded to ghost traces. The helm dominated the center of the room, its wooden wheel still pristine despite the decades underwater. Captain Knox Reynolds stood behind it. His hands gripped the wheel at 10 and 2. Perfect position, like he'd been steering through a difficult passage when time stopped. The pressed uniform still showed its brass buttons, though they'd gone dark with tarnish. His face had mostly rotted away, but the bones held their position. Looking forward, watching something through the windows that showed only black water now. I hung there in the doorway, my breathing loud in my ears. He hadn't fallen, hadn't collapsed or slumped or grabbed at anything. Just stood there at his post, hands on the wheel, and ceased. The same way the men in the hold had died. The same way the crewmen in the corridor had stopped mid-step. No panic. No struggle. Just an ending that came quiet and final while they went about their business. My depth gauge read 320 feet. Nitrogen narcosis could make you see things that weren't there, read meanings into random arrangements of debris. But this wasn't random. This was deliberate. This was a man who'd stayed at his station while something impossible happened around him. I moved into the bridge, my fins carrying me slowly across the space. Navigator's station sat to the left, a desk built into the wall with a chart table and instruments for calculating position. Ashton Berry occupied the seat there, his skeletal hands still resting on the desk surface. The right hand held a pencil, the fingers locked around it in a grip that had outlasted the flesh. The pencil pointed at a chart spread across the table. I leaned closer, my lights illuminating the paper. Navigation lines crossed the surface in neat, careful strokes, coordinates written in cramped, precise handwriting. Then, toward the bottom of the sheet, the lines went wrong, wavering, scratched, like the hand holding the pencil had started shaking too badly to write clearly. The last mark trailed off into nothing, just a streak of graphite fading across the page. Ashton's skull had tilted forward, looking down at his work. Round spectacles still perched on what remained of his nose. The lenses had clouded over with mineral deposits, but I could see through them well enough. See the eye sockets behind them, still angled at the chart, still trying to make sense of numbers that stopped adding up. I pushed away from the navigator station and swept my lights across the rest of the bridge. Radio equipment lined the far wall, vacuum tubes and dials and switches that had been state-of-the-art whenever the meridian went down. Arlo Rogers slumped over the desk there, his headphones still clamped over his skull, the cord trailing down to connect with equipment that would never transmit again. His hands rested on the desk, one near the telegraph key, the other on a notepad covered in scrawled writing I couldn't read from this distance. 3 men. 3 different stations. All of them at their posts when the end came. I'd pulled bodies from wrecks before, dozens of them over the years. Cargo ships that went down in storms, pleasure boats that hit reefs, a fishing trawler that got caught in a hurricane off the Carolina coast. The dead always told a story if you knew how to read them. Positions of the bodies, damage to the vessel, state of the equipment. You could reconstruct the final moments pretty accurately most times. Drowning victims clawed. They thrashed. They grabbed at anything within reach, trying to find air that wasn't there. Their faces locked in grimaces, mouths open, hands curled into desperate fists. These men showed none of that. I moved through the bridge, examining each body in turn, looking for signs of trauma, injury, anything that explained how they died. Knox's uniform showed no tears, no bloodstains, no damage except what time and water had inflicted. Ashton's clothes hung intact on his bones. Arlo's shirt remained tucked in, his headphones positioned carefully, professionally, the way a radio operator would wear them during a normal shift. They'd just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off whatever made them alive, left them standing or sitting in place while their bodies forgot how to work. My air gauge read 2,000 psi. Enough for another 15, maybe 20 minutes at this depth if I watched my consumption. I needed to find what Cole had sent me for and get out. But first, the log. Every ship kept one. Record of the voyage, positions, weather, crew activities, anything important that happened during the trip. The captain's log would be here on the bridge, somewhere secure and accessible. I found it in a cabinet built into the wall behind the helm, a leather-bound volume sealed inside a waterproof case that had mostly done its job. The seals had failed decades ago, but the case had protected the book long enough that it might still be readable. I pulled it free, the weight of it familiar in my hands. My camera hung from my vest, waterproof housing rated to 500 feet. I'd been photographing everything since I entered the wreck. Documentation that Cole wanted, proof that I'd found what he'd sent me for. The log case opened with some effort, the latches corroded but still functional. I laid it flat against the chart table, next to Ashton's skeletal hands, and opened the book. The pages had suffered. Water damage bloomed across them in brown stains. Ink had run in places, rendering whole passages illegible, but enough remained, enough to read. I flipped through to the final entries, my lights angled to illuminate the pages while my camera captured each one. The handwriting started neat and controlled. Standard log entries recording position and heading and weather conditions. Then, about 10 pages from the end, the writing changed. The letters grew larger, irregular, words crossed out and rewritten. Whole sentences scratched through so aggressively, the pen had torn the paper. I read what remained. October 19th. The pulse began at 0400 hours, rhythmic vibration traveling through the hull. Engineering reports no mechanical cause. All systems functioning normally. Crew reports difficulty sleeping. October 20th. Pulse continues. 18-hour duration without cessation. Navigator Ashton Berry reports compass deviations. Radio operator Arlo Rogers unable to raise any coastal stations. All chronometers running at different speeds. October 21st. Crew experiencing severe nausea. The pulse has intensified. It comes up through the deck plates, through the bulkheads, through our bones. Chief Engineer Tanner Howard reports the engine room instruments spinning without pattern. We are traveling, but the navigation shows us motionless. We are motionless, but the wake stretches behind us. Both. Neither. The handwriting had deteriorated to barely controlled scrawl. October 22nd. Cannot determine our position. The stars are wrong. The water is wrong. The pulse comes faster now, matches the rhythm of heartbeats, and the crew. The sentence ended there, just stopped mid-thought, the pen trailing off across the page. One more entry remained, written in letters so shaky they barely formed words. It's not a vibration. It's breathing. The ocean is breathing, and we are inside something that... Nothing else. Just blank pages after that, water-stained and empty. I hung there above the chart table, my lights illuminating words written by a man who'd stood 6 feet away from me for the last 70 years, and felt my chest tighten against my wetsuit. A pulse. A vibration. Something that came up through the hull and made the crew sick. Made the instruments fail. Made the captain's careful handwriting collapse into terrified scrawl. Something that breathed. My regulator hissed in the silence. The current moved through the bridge, stirring the charts suspended around me. Knox stood at his wheel, forever looking forward. Ashton bent over his calculations. Arlo slumped at his radio. All of them waiting in the dark while something breathed beneath them, around them, through them. The same thing that made my compasses spin. I turned the page. The handwriting had changed. Still Knox Reynolds's careful script, but tighter now, compressed. The letters pressed hard enough into the paper that I could feel the indentations through my glove. January 18th. Navigation has become impossible. My chest tightened. I kept reading. All compasses aboard the Meridian have ceased functioning. Not merely malfunctioning, they spin continuously, without pattern or purpose. The ship's primary compass, the backup units, even the small handheld instruments carried by the crew, all of them whirling as though seeking magnetic north in a place where north has ceased to exist. I'd seen my own compasses doing exactly that. Still were probably dangling useless from my BCD. The cold in my chest spread outward. Chief Engineer Howard reports no electrical interference, no magnetic anomalies from the cargo or engines. Navigator Barry has attempted celestial readings, but the persistent fog obscures all stars. We are adrift in more ways than one. The next entry sat below it, dated the same day, but written hours later based on the different pen. The radio has gone silent. Arlo has worked on the equipment for 6 hours straight. He insists the machinery is functional. Power flows, circuits complete, all components operating within normal parameters. Yet when he transmits, nothing. When he listens, only static. Not the static of interference or distance. Something else. Something that sounds almost rhythmic if one listens long enough. My regulators hissed. In, out, in, out. Rhythmic. I forced myself to keep reading. January 19th. The engines failed this morning. First the starboard, then the port 3 hours later. Howard is at a loss. The fuel is good, the mechanics sound, everything precisely as it should be. Yet the engines will not fire. We are dead in the water, drifting with currents I cannot chart toward destinations I cannot name. The writing had gotten smaller, tighter. Conserving space or conserving control, I couldn't tell which. The crew grows restless. I maintain discipline, but I hear the whispers. Cursed ship, cursed cargo, cursed voyage. Superstitious nonsense, yet I confess the sequence of failures defies rational explanation. I turned another page. The entries grew shorter. January 20th. Fog persists. No change in our situation. January 21st. Still adrift. Crew morale declining. January 22nd. Howard believes he hears something in the lower decks. I accompanied him on inspection. Found nothing. Then a gap. 3 days with no entries. When the writing resumed, the careful script had deteriorated into something barely controlled. January 25th. Something is wrong with the crew. My hand stopped moving. I stared at those words, feeling my pulse hammer against my wetsuit collar. They move too slowly. Simple tasks take twice as long as they should. I ordered Barry to plot our position, a task he could normally complete in minutes, and watched him stare at his charts for nearly an hour, his pencil hovering above the paper as though he had forgotten what numbers were. I confess I feel it myself, a heaviness in my thoughts, a thickness to the air that makes breathing feel labored even here on the open deck. My words come slowly. My crew responds more slowly still. The next paragraph had been started, scratched out, started again. Howard insists something is in the water. I told him he was succumbing to exhaustion and nerves. But I have seen it too. Or felt it. A presence in the deep water beneath us. A sense of vastness moving below the hull. The Meridian is not a small vessel, yet lately she feels fragile, exposed, like prey. My blood went cold. Actually cold despite the insulation of my wetsuit, despite the neutral temperature of the water around me. That word, prey, hit something primal in my hindbrain that had nothing to do with reason. I flipped to the final entry. Had to force my fingers to turn the page. The handwriting had fallen apart completely. The letters wandered across the lines, some words pressed so hard the pen had torn through the paper, others barely legible. January 27th. We are not alone down here, not out here, down. The crew has stopped speaking. They move through their duties in silence, their faces slack, their eyes distant. Arlo sits at his radio listening to static. Howard stands in the engine room staring at machinery that will not start. Barry charts courses to nowhere. I should give orders. Should maintain command. But the words stick in my throat, thick and slow. And by the time I speak them, my men have already drifted away to their stations, moving like sleepwalkers through routines they no longer understand. It circles us. I am certain now. Something vast moving in the depths, keeping pace with our drift. I feel it in the way the ship moves. Not the normal roll of waves, but something else. Something responding to pressure from below, to displacement, to the passage of something enormous through water that should be empty. The final lines were barely legible. I had to bring the logbook closer to my mask, my lights shining directly on the page. We are sinking. Slowly. So slowly I did not notice at first. But the waterline climbs higher each day. No hull breach, no damage. The ship simply settling deeper, pulled down by weight that should not exist. I understand now. The cargo is not what we thought. Or perhaps it is exactly what we thought, and we were fools to carry it. If anyone finds this record, do not disturb what rests here. Some things should remain buried. Some depths should not be. The entry ended. No signature. No final statement. Just that last sentence trailing off into nothing. The pen dragging across the paper as though the hand holding it had simply stopped. I closed the logbook. My hands were shaking. I shoved the logbook into my equipment bag with more force than necessary, my movements sharp and quick in the still water. Enough. I'd read enough. Cole McCormick wanted artifacts from the Meridian, and I was going to get them and get the hell out of this tomb. My lights swept across the bridge, cataloging objects with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd done 100 salvage jobs and knew exactly what wealthy collectors paid for. The ship's wheel. Too large, too cumbersome for the ascent I needed to make. The brass chronometer mounted on the wall. possible. The sextant still sitting in its case near Ashtonbury Station. Definitely. I moved to the navigator's table, working around the preserved corpse without looking at its face. The sextant case opened smoothly, the instrument inside still gleaming despite decades underwater. Quality brass, precision optics, worth a fortune to the right buyer. Into the bag. The chronometer came off the wall with some effort, its mounting bracket corroded but intact. Heavy, well made, the kind of instrument that lasted generations. Into the bag. I spotted the ship's bell mounted near the bridge entrance. Small enough to carry, historically significant, exactly the kind of thing Cole had specified in his list. I wrenched it free from its bracket, the metal grinding against corrosion, and felt the weight of it settle into my hands. Into the bag. My movements had taken on a frantic quality I didn't like. Professional salvage work was calm, methodical, controlled. This was something else. This was someone stripping valuables from a grave while trying not to think about what killed the people buried there. I grabbed a brass compass from the navigation station. Useless for actual navigation but worth money as an antique, and shoved it into the bag with the rest. Swept my lights across the bridge one more time, looking for anything else Cole's specifications had mentioned. There. A sealed wooden box on a shelf behind Knox Reynolds's desk, about the size of a briefcase. The wood looked too well preserved, the brass fittings too bright. I pulled it down, checked the weight. Heavy. Something valuable inside, probably. The kind of mystery box collectors paid premium rates for. I didn't open it. Didn't want to know. Just wanted to get it into my bag and get out of this place. The bag was getting heavy now, the artifacts weighing it down. But I could manage it. I'd done ascents with heavier loads. Just had to be careful, control my buoyancy, make my decompression stops. Just had to get away from the meridian and whatever presence the captain had felt circling in the deep water. I took one last look at the bridge, at Knox Reynolds bent over his final entry, at his crew frozen in their last moments, at the instruments and controls of a ship that had been pulled down into darkness by something that defied explanation. Then I turned toward the corridor, my fins kicking up small clouds of sediment, and began moving back the way I'd come. The cargo bay seemed darker on the return trip. My lights pushed against the black water, illuminating the same crates and containers I'd passed on my way to the bridge, but now they looked different. Threatening. The careful stacking suddenly seemed less like organization and more like concealment. Hiding something. Protecting something. I moved faster, my breathing rate climbing, regulators working harder to keep up with my demand for air. Not good. I needed to stay calm, conserve my gas, think about the long ascent ahead. But my hindbrain had taken over, the same primitive part that had recognized the word prey and understood exactly what it meant. I reached the cargo hatch and pulled myself through, emerging into the open water outside the hull. The Meridian's flank stretched away into darkness above and below me. My lights caught the name painted on her side, the letters still visible after all these years. Meridian. London. A tomb. A preserved graveyard. A monument to whatever had circled in the deep water and pulled this ship down slowly, so slowly the crew barely noticed until it was too late. I kicked upward, away from the hull, my equipment bag heavy against my side. Found the descent line by feel more than sight, my useless compasses still spinning in their housings. Grabbed the line and started up. The ascent protocol ran through my head automatically. 300 feet to the surface. Multiple decompression stops. Hours of hanging in the black water while my body off-gassed nitrogen. All of it necessary. All of it standard. All of it requiring me to stay in this water, breathing this air, floating above the meridian while something vast moved in the depths below. I pulled myself up the line hand over hand, my fins kicking steadily, putting distance between myself and the wreck. The hull disappeared into darkness below me. The artifacts in my bag clinked together softly with each movement. My breathing echoed inside my helmet. In, out, rhythmic, steady, the sound of someone ascending from a deep dive with valuable cargo and no complications. Except my heart was hammering, and my hands were shaking, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to drop the weights and bolt for the surface. Decompression sickness be damned. I kept climbing, steady, controlled, professional, getting the hell away from the meridian and whatever had killed its crew so quietly they'd barely had time to understand they were dying. I'd made it halfway up when everything went to shit. Then I felt it. A vibration, low enough that at first I thought maybe it was my imagination. Just nerves from what I'd seen down there. From those bodies arranged so carefully around their useless instruments. But it didn't fade. It built instead, growing from something barely there into a physical presence that moved through the water and into my bones. My jaw started aching first. The pressure built behind my teeth, making them feel loose in my gums. I clenched down without meaning to, tried to work my jaw to relieve the sensation. Didn't help. The vibration kept climbing, kept intensifying, until I could feel it in my skull, in my chest, in the long bones of my arms and legs. I stopped climbing, wrapped both hands around the ascent line and held on while the ocean hummed around me. This was it. What the log had described. What had started happening to the Meridian's crew on January 18th when navigation became impossible. My vision started going strange at the edges, not blurry exactly, more fractured. The beam from my primary light seemed to split into component colors, red and blue separating out from white. The particles in the water developed halos. When I looked at my own hand gripping the line, my glove appeared to trail ghost images behind it when I moved. The vibration climbed higher. My teeth hurt so bad I wanted to scream. Then my depth gauge went dark. Just like that. 1 second showing 148 feet, the next showing nothing at all. The LED display died completely, leaving a blank rectangle of plastic on my wrist. I stared at it for 2 heartbeats, 3, waiting for it to flicker back to life. It stayed dead. My breathing got harder, not from exertion, from the tight band of fear wrapping around my chest. I forced myself to look at my backup gauge, the analog one mounted on my console. The needle sat at 150 feet, exactly where it had been before. Steady, unmoving. That wasn't right either. I'd been ascending. The needle should have dropped. I gave the console a shake. The needle didn't budge. Fuck. The vibration kept building. I could feel it in my sinuses now, making my head pound. My vision fractured further, the water developing strange prismatic qualities that made depth perception nearly impossible. The ascent line seemed to bend and warp in front of me. My backup lights died next. Both of them went at once. The small floods mounted on either side of my mask, flickering twice and then cutting out. The darkness pressed in closer, held back only by my primary light. I reached up to tap the housings, knowing it wouldn't help but needing to try anyway. Nothing. Dead. 2 lights out of 3. 1 gauge completely dark, another frozen. And the vibration still climbing, making my whole body feel like it might shake apart from the inside. I started moving again. Pulled myself up the line hand over hand, faster than I should have. My ascent rate didn't matter if my equipment was failing. Better to risk the bends than run out of air at depth or lose my last light and have to climb through absolute darkness. That's when my regulator started acting up. The air came in a stutter. A full breath, then half, then nothing, then a gasping surge that filled my lungs too fast. I choked on it, coughed into my mouthpiece, tried to control my breathing to match the irregular flow. Couldn't do it. The regulator kept delivering air in random bursts, feast or famine, too much or not enough. My training said to switch to my backup regulator. My hands moved toward it automatically, muscle memory taking over. But I stopped halfway there, remembering Knox Reynolds's log. Equipment failed. All of it. Every system, one after another, until the crew had nothing left that worked. If I switched to backup now, would it just fail faster? Leave me with no options at all? I kept the primary regulator in my mouth, fought for each breath against the stuttering flow. My lungs burned. My vision narrowed further, the fractured edges creeping inward. The vibration peaked. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, it climbed so high I couldn't think, couldn't process anything except the sensation of my entire skeleton resonating at a frequency that felt like it would tear me apart. Then it dropped. Not gone, still there, still present, but reduced to something I could almost function through. My primary light flickered. No, not that. Anything but that. I grabbed the light housing, held it steady against my chest. The beam wavered, dimmed, came back to full strength, dimmed again. The darkness beyond my light seemed absolute now, thicker than it should be. I could feel it pressing against the shrinking bubble of illumination around me, waiting. That's when I saw the movement. Something passed at the very edge of my light, just a suggestion of motion, massive and deliberate. My whole body went rigid on the ascent line. I turned my head slowly, sweeping my flickering light through the water. Nothing. Just black water and drifting sediment, and the vibration that made everything shimmer and fragment. Then it passed again. Closer this time. The shape moved through the darkness beyond my light with a fluid grace that didn't match its scale. I caught glimpses, a curve of something vast, a suggestion of length. My brain tried to process what I was seeing and came up empty, too big, moving wrong, existing in a way that made my eyes hurt to track. My light steadied for a moment, stopped flickering. The thing came into full view. An eel. That was my first thought, the only frame of reference my mind could grab onto. The body had that serpentine quality, that boneless flowing movement through water. But the scale made no sense at all. The creature stretched longer than the meridian itself, had to be at least 200 feet from head to tail, maybe more. Hard to tell when I could only see portions of it at once, when my fractured vision made solid edges seem to shift and blur. The body wasn't smooth. Structures lined it at regular intervals, organic ridges or fins or something else entirely. They pulsed with light, blue-white luminescence that brightened and dimmed in sequence, running down the creature's length in waves. The bioluminescence provided its own illumination, painting the water around it in cold electric colors. I hung there on the ascent line and watched it pass. My regulator stuttered. I barely noticed. Couldn't process anything except the impossible thing moving through the deep water like it owned every inch of ocean around the meridian. The creature's head came into view, if it was a head. Something that might have been a mouth, or an opening, or just another structure among many. The pulsing lights ran across it in patterns that felt deliberate, organized, not random bioluminescence, but something closer to communication, or echolocation. The vibration, I realized, the hum that made my teeth ache and my equipment fail, it was coming from this thing. Had to be. The creature generated it somehow, used it to navigate or hunt, or just exist in these crushing depths. And it had driven Knox Reynolds and his crew insane. had made their instruments fail, their navigation impossible, their understanding of reality too fractured to maintain. The thing passed directly in front of me, maybe 30 feet away, close enough that I could see details in the structures along its body, ridges that looked almost like gills or vents, opening and closing in rhythm with the pulsing light. The skin appeared smooth, but I caught hints of texture, patterns that hurt to look at directly. My light flickered again, dimmed to almost nothing. The creature kept moving, patient, unconcerned. It didn't react to my presence at all, didn't change course or speed, just flowed through the water on whatever path it followed, doing whatever vast, incomprehensible things creatures like this did in the deep places where light never reached. The tail end finally came into view. It tapered to something that might have been a fin, structures there pulsing with the same blue-white luminescence as the rest. Then it was gone, disappeared into the darkness beyond my dying light. I sucked in a stuttering breath from my failing regulator and started climbing again. The pulse hit again, stronger this time, and my depth gauge flickered and died. Not just interference now, complete failure. My compass needle spun faster, the card inside tilting at impossible angles. The readout on my air pressure gauge jumped from 1200 psi to 4000 and back to nothing. Every pulse, every time that thing lit up the water around me. Christ. My hands kept moving on the ascent line, but my brain was finally catching up, putting together what I'd been too focused on survival to see. The electromagnetic interference Knox Reynolds had written about, the way his instruments had failed before his crew started dying, the spinning compasses and dead radios and navigation equipment that couldn't hold a reading. This thing didn't just happen to create interference, it hunted with it. I watched another pulse ripple through the creature's body, saw the blue-white luminescence spread along what I'd thought were patterns, but now recognized as something else. Specialized organs, maybe. Bioelectric generators. Whatever the hell they were, they threw off enough electromagnetic energy to kill every piece of equipment within range, including mine, the lights, the gauges, the regulators with their pressure sensors and balanced valves. All of it running on principles that depended on consistent physical laws, on metal parts that didn't get scrambled by fields strong enough to spin a compass like a top. It didn't need teeth, didn't need speed. It just made a dead zone in the water where nothing worked right, where your equipment failed and your sense of direction went to hell, and you drifted there in the dark, trying to figure out which way was up while the thing circled below. Waiting for you to sink. Because that's what happened when your buoyancy compensator stopped inflating properly, when you couldn't trust your gauges to tell you how much air you had left, when your lights died and left you blind. You sank, slow and confused and disoriented, dropping back down into range while the creature pulsed its electromagnetic field and scrambled every system you had. The meridian hadn't been hit by some catastrophic event. No explosion, no hull breach, no sudden disaster that killed the crew in minutes. They drifted, lost navigation, lost communication, lost the ability to tell where they were or which direction would take them to safety, floating in a dead zone while that thing circled somewhere below them, pumping out interference, waiting for the ship to lose power completely and start its long, slow descent to the bottom, where the crew would follow, one by one, confused and lethargic and unable to think clearly enough to understand what was happening to them. Just what Knox Reynolds had described in his final entries. Another pulse lit up the water. I watched it spread through the creature's body, beautiful and deadly, and felt my backup light flicker. The beam strobed once, twice, then steadied again at maybe half its normal brightness. My arms felt heavy. I pulled myself up the line anyway, hand over hand, fins kicking in rhythm that was starting to feel like it took too much effort. The rope slid through my gloves. I counted pulls. 1, 2, 3. Trying to keep my mind focused on something simple, something I could hold on to. 4, 5. The creature moved below me. I couldn't see it anymore, but I could feel it somehow, a presence in the water that registered in my bones more than my eyes. Circling. Patient. It had probably been doing this for centuries, millennia maybe. Developing this hunting method in the deep trenches where nothing human had ever reached, perfecting it against prey that had their own electromagnetic senses, their own navigation systems. We'd just brought it better targets, ships full of metal and electrical systems, divers with computers and gauges and lights. 6, 7. My legs felt wrong, not cramping exactly, just slow, like they were moving through something thicker than water, something that dragged at every motion and made each kick take twice the effort it should. 8. I stopped counting. The numbers kept slipping away from me anyway, disappearing from my head before I could hold on to them. Had I made it to 10? 15? I couldn't remember. Didn't matter, just had to keep climbing. The ascent line moved past my mask, hand over hand. Keep the rhythm. Don't think about how far I still had to go or how heavy my arms were getting or the way my thoughts seemed to be stretching out, taking longer to form than they should. Knox Reynolds had described this: the lethargy, the confusion, crew members who couldn't complete simple tasks, who stood staring at controls they'd operated for years without remembering what the buttons did. I pulled myself up another foot, then another. My right hand slipped off the rope. I grabbed for it again, fingers clumsy inside my glove, and caught it on the second try. Wrapped my fist tight around the line and hung there for a second, breathing hard, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs. The creature pulsed again. Closer now. I could see the glow through the murk below me, blue-white light spreading in waves that made the water itself seem to shudder. My regulator hissed in my ear. The sound had changed, rougher, working harder to deliver air. I sucked in a breath and got about half what I should have. The inhalation felt thin, unsatisfying. I tried again and the regulator stuttered, gave me a mouthful of water mixed with air, then caught itself and delivered another weak stream of gas. Shit. Not just the gauges failing, the whole system, the pressure sensors, the demand valves, all of it getting scrambled by whatever field that thing was throwing off. I pulled myself up the line. Faster now, urgency cutting through the fog in my head. My backup light flickered again, the beam dying to almost nothing before surging back. The regulator stuttered, caught, delivered half a breath. I reached for the valve on my emergency pony bottle, the little backup tank strapped to my side. My fingers found the knob and tried to turn it. Nothing happened. I gripped harder, twisted, felt my hand slip off. The main regulator coughed in my mouth. Water, then air, then nothing. I grabbed for the pony bottle valve again. My fingers didn't want to close properly. They felt thick, numb. I could see my hand wrapping around the metal knob, but I couldn't feel it. Couldn't tell if I had enough grip to turn the damn thing. Below me, the creature pulsed. The light spread through the water, brighter than before. So close I could make out individual patterns in the luminescence, traceries of bioelectric fire that branched through its body in networks that probably made perfect sense to something that navigated by electromagnetic fields. My backup light died completely, just went dark, no flicker, no warning. The beam vanished and left me in absolute blackness, with a regulator that wouldn't deliver air and fingers that barely responded to what my brain was telling them to do. Turn the valve. Emergency air. Do it now. I twisted my hand. Felt something move. The knob, maybe. Couldn't tell. Tried again. Put everything I had into it. My fingers were someone else's fingers, clumsy and distant and moving through invisible mud. The knob turned. I felt it give, felt the resistance break. Air flooded into the emergency regulator hanging at my chest. I spat out the dead primary reg and grabbed for the backup with my right hand, fingers fumbling, missing it once before I caught the mouthpiece and shoved it between my teeth. Sweet air, thin and metallic tasting, but there. Flowing steady. I sucked it down in gasping breaths, feeling my vision clear slightly, the gray edges pulling back. My left hand was still wrapped around the ascent line. I made my right hand join it and pulled myself up another foot. The creature rose beneath me. I saw it this time. Not just the glow, but the shape itself, massive and fluid, swimming up through the darkness with movements that looked lazy, but covered distance faster than anything that size should move. The light pulsed through its body in waves, brighter now, and I felt the answering spike in the interference. My new regulator stuttered. My emergency computer, the one analog backup I'd brought that didn't depend on electronics, pressed against my wrist, useless in the dark. The thing was maybe 30 feet below me, close enough that I could make out details, the way its body tapered at both ends, the patterns of light that weren't random, but structured, organized, purposeful. The massive eye that tracked my movement with an awareness that made my chest go tight. It was looking at me, not the way a shark looked at potential prey, all instinct and reaction. This was different, calculated, intelligent. I pulled myself up the line. The creature rose to match me, maintaining the distance. Not attacking, not fleeing, just keeping pace, its pulses coming stronger and more frequent, scrambling my equipment, flooding the water with electromagnetic noise. Hurting me, or testing me, or just waiting to see how long I could last before the lethargy pulled me down. It pulsed again and swam closer. 20 feet now. I could see the texture of its skin, the way the light organs sat just beneath the surface, glowing like embers under dark glass. Could see the intelligence in that enormous eye, the patience of something that had been doing this since before humans figured out how to make fire. This was its territory, its hunting ground. We were the intruders, bringing our metal toys and our electrical systems right into its domain, probably calling to it the way blood called to sharks. The meridian must have lit up its senses from miles away. All that metal, all those systems. An irresistible target. The creature made another pass. Closer still. 15 feet below me, moving in a slow spiral that brought it around my left side. The eye tracked me the whole time, unblinking, measuring. I hung onto the ascent line and stared back at it, and saw something in that gaze that was worse than hunger or aggression. Recognition. It knew what I was. Knew what all the prey that came down here with their lights and their metal were. Had probably been hunting us since the first ships crossed these waters, learning our patterns, understanding our weaknesses, developing techniques that worked on creatures stupid enough to trust their instruments in its territory. This wasn't some mindless predator. This was something that thought, that planned, that had spent millennia perfecting the art of making technology fail, and watching what happened when the clever prey suddenly wasn't so clever anymore. The eye held mine for another second. Then the creature pulsed once more, bright enough to hurt even through the murk, and turned away into the darkness. Going deep, back down toward the meridian and whatever else waited in its graveyard, leaving me alive because I was already doing what it wanted. Climbing, fleeing, getting the hell out of its territory. I didn't waste time wondering if it would change its mind. I stopped thinking, stopped calculating, just kicked. My fins drove me upward through the black water, every muscle burning with the effort. The descent line slid past my gloves in a blur I barely registered. My regulators wheezed and stuttered, feeding me air that tasted wrong, metallic and thin. But I didn't slow down to check my gauges, didn't look at my depth or my pressure or my ascent rate, just climbed. The equipment bag hung heavy from my harness, dragging at my shoulders with the weight of Cole's precious artifacts. My camera rig bumped against my chest with each kick, its housing scratching against my wetsuit. I'd spent 2 hours collecting that cargo, documenting everything. Following procedure even while Knox Reynolds' crew sat frozen in their chairs, and something massive moved through the dark beyond my lights. I reached down and unclipped the bag. Let it fall. The weight dropped away into darkness, tumbling end over end until the black swallowed it. Somewhere far below, it would settle on the Meridian's deck, add itself to the collection. My camera rig went next. I tore the mount from my chest harness and watched $3,000 worth of specialized equipment disappear. Didn't hesitate, didn't reconsider. The pulse hit again, not as strong this time. The pressure wave rolled through the water around me, making my mask flex against my face, but my skull didn't feel compressed anymore. The sensation had weakened, diluted by distance or depth or something else I didn't understand and didn't care about. I kept climbing. My primary light flickered once, twice, then died completely. The backup lamp on my shoulder gave one last pale flash before cutting out. Darkness closed around me, absolute and complete. I couldn't see my hand in front of my mask. Couldn't see the descent line I was hauling myself up. Didn't matter. I wrapped my gloved fingers around the line and pulled. Found it with my other hand. Pulled again. My fins kicked in steady rhythm, driving me upward through water I couldn't see but could feel growing lighter, less dense. The pressure against my wetsuit eased with each meter gained. Another pulse rolled past. Weaker still. A tremor instead of a hammer blow. My lungs burned. The regulator in my mouth hissed and caught, feeding me half-breaths that weren't quite enough. I was ascending too fast. Way too fast. The nitrogen in my blood would be coming out of solution, forming bubbles in my tissues. Decompression sickness waited at the top of this climb, the bends that could cripple or kill if the bubble load got high enough. Still didn't slow down. Better the bends than whatever lived in the dark below. Better pain and paralysis than joining Knox Reynolds in his eternal radio watch. The water around me shifted from black to deep gray. My eyes, adapted to total darkness, caught the change. Registered the faint glow of sunlight filtering down from somewhere impossibly far above. I pulled harder. My regulator gave a final rattling gasp and went silent. No more air. I sucked against nothing, my lungs straining, and felt the familiar spike of panic that came with an empty tank. My training kicked in automatically. I reached for my backup regulator, found it clipped to my chest, brought it to my mouth. Dead. No air there either, both tanks empty or the valves fried by whatever that pulse had done to my equipment. Didn't matter which, the result was the same. I had maybe 60 seconds of oxygen in my blood, maybe less after the exertion of the climb. The gray brightened to pale green. I could see my hands now, my gloves wrapped white-knuckled around the ascent line. Could see my fins churning below me. 30 seconds. My chest started to burn. The carbon dioxide building in my system screamed at me to breathe, to open my mouth and suck in whatever was available. I kept my jaw clenched around the useless regulator. 20 seconds. The light above resolved into a shimmer, a moving surface that bent and rippled. 10 seconds. I let go of the line and kicked straight up, my vision narrowing to a tunnel, my lungs spasming. The surface rushed toward me. Still too far. Still. I broke through into air and sunlight, gasped, choked, sucked in a breath that felt like fire and tasted better than anything I'd ever known. My mask had flooded at some point during the ascent. Salt water burned my eyes and nose. I tore the thing off my face and let it sink, gulping air in ragged heaves that made my chest ache. The sky overhead stretched blue and perfect, cloudless. The sun hung maybe 2 hours past noon, its light sparkling off the gentle swells around me. I'd never seen anything more beautiful. My boat floated 30 yards away. The 26-foot center console I'd bought used 3 years back, her hull showing wear, but her engine solid. She sat dead in the water, drifting on the current. I swam toward her. My fins felt heavy as concrete. My wetsuit had trapped water that turned cold now that I'd stopped moving, and my whole body shook with exhaustion and shock and the aftermath of pure terror. Took me 5 minutes to cover 30 yards. Felt like 5 hours. I grabbed the dive ladder mounted on the transom and hung there for a moment. My forehead pressed against the warm fiberglass, my breath still coming in gasps. Then I hauled myself up, pulled my fins off and dropped them in the deck, collapsed onto the non-skid surface and just lay there, staring at the sky. My body started cataloging the damage. My joints ached with a deep bone-grinding pain that meant the nitrogen bubbles had already formed. My left elbow felt wrong. My right shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. The bends coming on fast and mean. Still better than the alternative. I rolled onto my side after a while and looked at the console. The GPS screen showed nothing but black. The fish finder, dead. The radio mounted above the steering wheel had a crack running through its display. The VHF handheld in its charging cradle looked intact, but when I pressed the power button, nothing happened. Every electronic system on the boat had been fried. The pulse had reached this far. Whatever that thing generated hadn't stopped at the meridian. It had propagated upward through 300 feet of water and killed every circuit on my vessel. I was sitting there trying to process that when the emergency radio crackled to life. The sound came from the forward storage compartment. I'd installed a shielded case there 2 years back, a Faraday box lined with copper mesh, designed to protect sensitive equipment from electromagnetic interference. Inside, I kept a backup handheld VHF, spare batteries, and a satellite phone. The radio crackled again. Then Angela's voice cut through the static, sharp with worry. "Seth, you copy?" "Seth, respond. I lost your beacon 20 minutes ago and—" I crawled forward. My hands shook as I opened the compartment and pulled out the radio. "I'm here." My voice came out rough, raw. "I'm up." The relief in her response was immediate. "Jesus, your beacon just disappeared off my screen. All your telemetry went dead at once. What the hell happened down there?" I sat with my back against the console, the radio in my lap, and tried to figure out how to answer that. What had happened? I'd found the meridian exactly where Cole's coordinates had placed her. Found her intact and wrong, her crew frozen at their stations, her hull singing with something that bent magnetic fields and killed compasses. Found Knox Reynolds' log describing the same wrongness, the same slow creeping awareness that they were being hunted. Found evidence of something massive living in the deep that had claimed that ship and everyone on it. Nearly claimed me, too. "Equipment failure," I said finally. "Total system crash at depth. Had to do an emergency ascent." Silence on the other end. Then, "Your ascent rate would have been, Seth, you need a chamber. Now. I'm calling the Coast Guard." "No." The word came out harder than I meant it. "No Coast Guard, no hospitals. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You just did an uncontrolled ascent from 300 feet. You need recompression or you're going to—" "Angela." I kept my voice level, calm. "I'm handling it. I've got oxygen on board. I know the protocols. Another pause. I could hear her breathing through the radio. Could picture her on her boat 12 miles north, staring at her dead tracking screen and trying to decide whether to override me. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked finally. "Everything." "Nothing to tell," I said. "Bad dive, bad luck. I'm coming in." I disconnected before she could argue. The satellite phone sat in the shielded case next to the radio. I pulled it out and stared at it for a long moment. Cole would be expecting a call, an update, confirmation that I'd recovered his artifacts and documented the Meridian's final resting place. I turned the phone over in my hands. Then I set it aside and went looking for my camera equipment. Found the backup storage case in the aft compartment. The primary footage was gone, lost with the camera rig I'd dropped during the ascent, but I'd been running a secondary recorder mounted on my helmet. The memory card sat in its protective housing, no bigger than my thumbnail. Everything I'd seen was on that card. The Meridian's cargo hold, the frozen crew. Knox Reynolds slumped over his calculations, the readings from my instruments as they went haywire, maybe even a glimpse of whatever had been moving in the dark. Evidence. Proof. The kind of documentation that would make my reputation if I released it. That would bring investigators and researchers and media attention. That would put the Meridian on every chart and bring every glory-hunting diver within 1,000 miles straight to those coordinates. I held the memory card between my thumb and forefinger. The sun had set by the time I made my decision. The sky had gone purple and orange, stars beginning to show in the east. My boat drifted on calm seas, her dead electronics silent. I'd pulled the memory card from its housing, pulled the backup card from my helmet mount, pulled every piece of storage media I had on board and laid them out on the deck. Then I'd gotten a hammer from my toolkit. The first card shattered on the third hit, plastic fragments scattering across the non-skid. The chips inside, the actual memory storage, required more work. I ground each piece under the hammer until nothing recognizable remained. Did the same with the second card, the third, the fourth. When I was done, I swept the fragments into a bucket and walked to the rail, dumped the whole mess overboard, watched the pieces scatter across the dark water and sink. Evidence gone. Documentation destroyed. The Meridian's location and condition erased from every record except my memory. The satellite phone rang while I was washing the plastic dust off my hands. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Seth." Cole's voice came through sharp and expectant. "I've been waiting for your call. Tell me you have good news." I sat on the gunwale and looked out at the dark water. "Your coordinates were wrong." Silence. Then, "I beg your pardon." "Wrong coordinates. I spent 6 hours searching the bottom, found nothing but sand and scattered debris. No wreck, no artifacts, nothing." "That's impossible." His voice had gone cold. "Those coordinates came from historical records that... Then your records are wrong. I'm telling you what I found. Empty ocean floor." "You're lying." "Flat. Certain." "I paid you a substantial sum to..." "You paid me to search specific coordinates. I searched them. There's nothing there. I have contracts, Seth. Legal obligations you agreed to. If you're attempting to renegotiate our arrangement or hold my property for additional..." I disconnected. The phone rang again immediately. I powered it off and threw it in the ocean. It sank without a splash, following the memory cards into the dark. Cole would make noise, threaten lawsuits, maybe even try to hire another diver to verify my story. But without my documentation, without GPS logs or footage or any physical evidence, he had nothing. Just the word of one diver who claimed to have found empty ocean. He'd move on eventually. find another obsession, another artifact to chase, and the Meridian would stay hidden, stay undisturbed. Her crew would remain at their stations, frozen in whatever moment that thing had chosen to preserve them. The stars came out properly while I sat there on the gunwale, the Milky Way spreading across the sky in a band of light that you never saw from shore, beautiful and indifferent. The ocean rolled beneath me in gentle swells, the same water that hid Knox Reynolds and his crew 300 feet down. I'd spend the rest of my life making sure no one else went looking for them. No coordinates shared over drinks in marina bars. No stories told to young divers hungry for reputation. No hints dropped to researchers or documentary crews or treasure hunters. The Meridian's location would die with me, locked behind my teeth where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Cole would rage. Angela would ask questions I wouldn't answer. Other clients would hear I'd failed a recovery job and maybe think twice before hiring me. Didn't matter. The night air had turned cold. I stood slowly, my joints protesting, and made my way to the helm. The engine would still work. It was old enough to run on mechanical systems, no computer required. I'd get back to shore, get myself to a recompression chamber before the bends did permanent damage, file my equipment as a total loss, and move on to shallower work. Safer work. The kind where the only things watching you were fish. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then caught with a rumble that felt like salvation. I pointed the bow toward shore and pushed the throttle forward, leaving the Meridian and its graveyard behind in the dark. Where it would stay. Where I'd make damn sure it stayed. Forever.